Welcome to Managing for Profit on Brownfield, a content partnership with Channel. I'm Megan Grebner. With us today is Todd Vagts, who is in Minnesota. Todd, thank you so much for taking some time to join us.
Well, thank you for having me.
How's your winter been so far?
It's been very mild, to say the least, I think, which is probably the case for most individuals across the Midwest. Today, I see it's sunny out for the first time in about a week and a half, but yeah, it's supposed to be in the lower 40s today here in southeast Minnesota. But yes, been very mild. A little bit of precipitation, which I think many of us need. I think more precipitation this winter as in the liquid form than actually snow. I don't think a lot of areas have much frost. So, hopefully a lot of this precipitation we've been getting has been going in the ground and helping to set us up for a little bit better spring than maybe what we've seen in the last couple of springs where it's been relatively dry. So yeah, it's certainly a different winter to say the least.
There's been a lot of areas, and I've talked to producers around west of the Mississippi River where it's still been really dry. How critical is it to have this winter precipitation or winter moisture that actually can help recharge those soils before we head into spring planting?
Well, I think for many of us, particularly this year, it's extremely critical because it's as you mentioned, and particularly probably west of Mississippi, it was a very dry summer last year, very dry fall. Some of us have had some recharge last fall and so forth, but anything that we can get in the winter, and even if it doesn't necessarily go in the soil, we have a lot of ponds that need to get recharged, river flows need to get recharged. And like I kind of said, I don't think we have a whole lot of frost in a lot of areas. So even some of the melt or some of these slower precipitation events we've had have been able to seep into the ground, and certainly is going to, we can take anything that we can get. I think will be helpful for many of us.
We're going to talk today about thinking about soybean production or about soybean production in general. And one of the things maybe we don't think about as often is the pH of soils. But the reality is soil pH can be a big factor when it comes to soybean yield success. What do farmers need to know heading into this growing season?
Well, sure thing. And, in general, when we're talking pH, it's, for the most part, it's just knowing what the pH is on our soils. And so just annual soil testing, extremely important to be able to know what your pH is across your different soil types. So that's critical. And then, managing that pH and most crops like that pH anywhere from a, mid 6, 6.3, 6.4, 6.5 up to 6.7. And then generally as we get, in the low 6s to 5s, that's where we start to get some challenges uptaking some nutrients. And then particularly as we look at, where I'm at in Minnesota, if we go central western Minnesota and Dakotas, then higher soil pHs really get to be the challenge, and particularly with iron issues. And so, it kind of depends on where you're at, the types of soils that you have, but really maintaining that mid 6 pH is critical. And again, just knowing what those pHs are across your different fields is very, very important.
Some farmers consider adding micronutrients to help boost soybean production. Does that mean higher yield if they're adding those nutrients automatically?
That can be a challenging question depending on who you're talking to. Yes, when we get into our high yield soybean production scenarios, and I think looking at some micronutrients can certainly be something to look at. Personally, from my own opinion, I think within soybean production, we have a lot of other factors that we have to address first, and whether that's soil pH or whether that's phosphorus, potassium, a lot of disease management. And, for me here in Minnesota, white mold is a big deal, but then you got SDS, brown stem rot, a lot of other factors, pest management that I think is really critical first to look at. And then as we get into those, if we get those under control, managed well, and then looking at, micronutrients or, whether it's foliar fertilization, things like that can come into play to kind of help you get to that next step as far as obtaining some higher yield levels in that sense.
How is plant growth then affected by macronutrients, thinking about like our N, P, and K?
Well, again, with soybeans, that gets to be a little bit of a balancing act. And again, from when I look at it from my perspective here in eastern Minnesota, white mold is a big factor for us. So we don't want to get too large of a plant canopy. So fertilizing for the plant needs is extremely important, but we don't want to over fertilize. And oftentimes that comes into play if we're using a lot of manure, or we're getting maybe some additional nitrogen, sulfur, high P and K levels, where we got some really nice vegetative growth that can occur. And then we get that denser canopy, and then at least from my situation, white mold gets to be an issue. But then you can have other factors that come into play, such as plant lodging, other diseases that can take effect when we get that higher, denser canopy in that sense. So it's a balancing act, but like most crops, just having that adequate level of phosphorus, potassium, extremely important. And particularly in soybeans, potassium is extremely important. We get a large uptake of potassium in beans, and we're removing a lot of potassium with our bean crop as well. Upwards over of about a pound of potassium per bushel of soybeans that we're taking off of the field.
If a farmer knows that soil conditions or fertility isn't where it should be, what do they need to do, or what can be done at this point?
Yeah, again, first and foremost, soil testing is extremely critical. So, generally we recommend every 3 to 4 years doing a soil test. I like to see grid sampling. Oftentimes that's on a 2.5 acre grid. It can be a 5 acre grid, or you can often do, if you know what your zones are across the field, you can do zone sampling so that you're kind of sampling similar type soils. But first and foremost, know what your soil test levels are. And then you can kind of decide, once you find out where they're at, are you in the low to very low categories of P and K? If so, what do you need to do to kind of build those levels back up? If you're in that optimum level or high to very high, then you have to decide, okay, then oftentimes if you're in the optimum, then you can look at what you're removing and then just do a replacement process, both with the corn and soybeans, but or on a 2 year rotation. Or if you're in that higher to very high, then maybe you just want to again still be in that replacement category. Or if you're trying to manage your economics on it, you don't necessarily have to apply a full rate just for that removal. But it just kind of depends on what the strategy is. If you own the farm or if you're renting, kind of where you want to go in that category. But first and foremost, you have to know what you have, and soil testing is extremely important to do that.
Todd, how do channel seed pros help, and how are they involved in that product selection for growers?
Sure. Well, first and foremost, our seed pros are local. They know what the local field conditions are, and again, whether you have higher organic matter soils, lower if you're irrigated, non-irrigated, if you have higher pH soils, lower pH soils, east to west, and so forth, they know locally oftentimes what's recommended, and particularly knowing our varieties that we have and being able to maximize the yield of those varieties. Again, whether it's based on disease selection, or if you're that grower that has everything pretty well set, being able to push those soybean yields to the next level, and again maintaining that fertility, and then whether it's the different management factors using a lot of different IPM processes to protect those crops, but again getting that fertility right, and whether again if it's micronutrients or whatever, they'll know locally what is needed to do that.
Todd, if folks want to find out more information, what's the best way for them to do so?
Well, certainly they can go to channel.com, is where you can get all the information on channel seed, and then being able to also, if you're trying to locate a channel or a local channel seed pro, that's the place to go. If you already know your channel seed pro, obviously just give that person a call and ask that individual to get the information that you need.
Todd, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Yes, you're very welcome. Thank you.
Have a great planting season.
Yes, thanks.
That's Todd Vagts with Channel. I'm Megan Grevner with Managing for Profit, a content partnership with Channel Seed on Brownfield.